not really sure how to follow that, actually. It's just going to go downhill possibly after that introduction. So first of all, I'm Phil Copperwheat, so thanks very much for the Things Industries Conference for inviting me here today. First of all, I'll kind of just do a bit of a setting the scene. So I'm from an organisation called Morgan Sindall in the UK. So we're a construction and regeneration group. We focus on everything from building some of the UK's nuclear power plants, through to looking after 120,000 homes in the UK, through to fitting out Google's lovely offices in London, and probably everything else in between it. So we are really that end user who's trying to actually then deploy the technology. A couple of years ago, we went on a strategic journey around bringing the physical world into the digital world. And again, our focus, as if you caught me kind of earlier, is all around that concept of health, sustainability, and safety inside of the built environment. And we look to deploy those use cases in lots of different sectors. So you'll find LoRa technology on our construction sites, ensuring the health and safety of those and the people that are working on them. You'll find it in some commercial premises where it's looking at the air quality and the energy efficiency and the sustainability of those spaces. You'll see it in some of our fit-outs where they're looking to see how people are using the space. And you'll also see it in some of our property managements where we're looking after people's homes. Today, we're going to mostly focus on that use case around technology to support tenants in their homes to make sure we can monitor them, ensure they're healthy, safe, and sustainable. So, digitalising the home. So if you imagine from our point of view, we're looking after 120,000 homes in the UK. Predominantly in the UK, that's referred to as social housing, where we're looking to actually understand the conditions inside of that home so we can actually make sure we can manage it better and that the tenant is safe inside of those. So that might be about looking at the fabric of the building and trying to identify issues before they turn into significant problems that will then involve significant amounts of money to solve. So we've looked then to deploy LoRa technology in the form of gateways, both internal to the home and external to the home. Sensors then in the different rooms that can actually monitor it. We use TTI to then bring all that data back into our Azure implementation. And then we use the Azure platform to actually then start to realize some value out of the data and how we can use that to actually drive some better decisions inside of the business. If you then look at where we're trying to get to, for us, it's all about the data. We're not a systems integrator, we're not a software provider, we're not a manufacturer of sensors inside of that. We're really trying to get to the core of that data around those properties that we're managing. And what we're trying to understand is how do we use that data in a way that drives better behavior. Temperature data on its own doesn't necessarily allow us to deliver better services. CO2 on its own doesn't allow us to deliver better services. It's how we kind of integrate that together and how we pull that data back to give that overall health of how that property is performing. So I'm just going to go through a little bit about how it works. Some of you in the audience will know this back to front and probably in a level of detail that I can't kind of then touch, but I'll try and give you a little bit more of like a business overview of where we are. So as I said, gateways. We're a mix of deploying gateways in boroughs. If any of you guys have been or are in the UK, there's a borough called Basildon in the wonderful world of Essex, which is probably synonymous with TV programs, again, if you come from the UK, where we're deploying sensors in that borough to monitor the housing stock that's in that area. So at the moment, we've got about 7 or 8 external gateways, and we have a number of internal gateways where it's a multi-story building where we're looking to actually monitor that health of those different properties. So there we have hundreds of homes. They might be, as again, flats, or they might be semi-detached or detached properties where they've got occupants inside of them, where we're trying to actually monitor that behavior. Sensors then are in multiple rooms, so we don't subscribe to the philosophy of one sensor tells you everything about a home, where we're looking to understand what's the conditions in a bathroom, what's the conditions in a kitchen, what's the conditions in the living room, how, when you add all that information together, do you start to get a view of what the overall health is of the property. Touching on some of the use cases that we look at, and this really steps to why LoRa, TTI, the vendors out there today that you'll get, why there's such a wide variety of sensors that allow us to deliver a lot of our different use cases. So in a lot of cases, we might be looking to monitor the health conditions in the home for the actual tenant to make sure that from an internal air quality perspective that they are safe. In the UK, there's been a lot of focus around the external air quality, and now some of that focus is coming to the internal air quality inside the buildings and homes that people kind of then live in. We look to understand where leak detection actually may be going on. In London, we look after a lot of properties. A lot of those properties are now actually getting quite old. We have cases where there are escapes of water in one flat, and trying to trace where that water is actually coming from when you're looking at a flat on the bottom floor sometimes is a bit of a challenge. By deploying sensors inside of conduits and inside of risers, we can start to understand where that water may be coming from inside of those properties to give us a better view of it. Damp and mold in the UK is a significant challenge that we all face. Some of that is around fuel poverty and people being able to heat their homes to a standard. Some of it is the level of the properties that are in the UK and construction techniques. What we can then do, though, is look to understand, though, where we're starting to see issues around damp and mold. So simply by monitoring temperature and humidity, we can obviously start to see different levels. What we're looking for, though, is to see where levels are sustainable at a high level for a period of time and understand if they're actually happening in certain rooms and are they then permeating around the house and how long that's kind of staying inside of it. We do some work around Legionella testing, again, in central London. We look at fire doors as well, understanding open close to help us understand how we can use that data to inform our maintenance and services that we do inside of it. We do a lot now around energy metering, both on our construction sites and our commercial sites, but also from a home point of view. And people have talked about it today. The energy crisis that's a challenge throughout Europe and very much inside of the UK, of understanding how people are using the energy is really important. And then we have the decarbonisation agenda that's going on in our homes, bringing technology that is probably more prevalent here in Europe around heat pump technology into the UK and moving away from using the fossil fuels. Understanding how people are using that energy is as much important as actually changing the heat sources and energy sources that we have. And giving that information back to the tenant, the individual inside the property, is really key in a way that they can use that data to make some informed decisions is quite fundamental to what we're trying to do. So as you guys will kind of know and other people have talked about, the gateways are connecting the information that's kind of then out there and pulling that information then back into our Azure IoT implementation. We've had some painful lessons in our understanding, so understand this is not a technology issue, this is our understanding of gateway design and how we actually position those inside the environment where we deliver the service. Sometimes we're limited about where we can find a building to put a capability on. Some of it has been how you actually install those gateways and how you actually position those, and that's a real lesson for people as they kind of come along this journey, where you're someone like us who in effect is a construction and building company, and we don't profess to be IoT professionals or integrators. Having people and partners that can work with you about how you position that gateways and that design is really important to make sure that you don't fall into some of the traps that kind of then we have in our understanding of it. The benefits that we do get, though, from the technology, especially from the fact that we don't require power and we're not dependent on Wi-Fi inside the properties where we work, has been quite instrumental in our ability to deploy a capability quickly. We already have a field force of over 1,500 engineers in the UK that are delivering services, and a portion of those have been trained up in a way that they can deliver the sensors and deploy them into the properties in an easy way. So we don't have to have specialist teams, it's not a significantly complicated activity, provided you have an onboarding platform or support, either your own or someone like Daisy or someone like that, then you can allow yourself to then deploy those sensors at scale across into the different properties. Now, the next piece is around the analytics, and I think this is where we try and actually focus. So we're definitely not an IoT company, we're definitely not a gateway installation company. What we're trying to really do is focus on the analytics and how we actually use that effectively. So as I said, we're pulling all of this data back from the sensors, and I think that's probably only half of the answer of the journey. You can't just look at the data in isolation to then make necessarily effective decisions in the sectors that we're operating in. Just because a sensor says one thing, you've got to put that into some level of context to understand, is that significant or is that not significant? So we have a data model where we pull all this information back into. We capture information around the asset, both in the physical terms of kind of what it is, but also then in the data terms of what we're getting from sensors. We overlay that with other information then. So it might be around the demographic profile of the people that are in the home. So we're not tracking the people or who it is, but there's a difference if there's a single person living in a home to if there's a family living in the home in how we interpret the data and how we identify if there are issues inside of there so that we don't drive false positives. We also look at the wider environment of the community of where we're delivering those sensors, and we also look at our service. So if we know that we've been having issues around a certain asset, we're looking at that data combined with a feed of the data that we're getting back from the asset to help us try and understand what's actually going on and make the decisions in the software as to what do we recommend that we should do. The pure sensor data on its own is just one part of that, and augmenting that with other data sets is what allows us to deliver a richer service around it. Once we've got those insights, we can then start to kind of then visualize them and give us an indication of what they are. So I think the picture that you've got up there is the London Borough of Waltham Forest, where we're monitoring a number of those properties inside of there and understanding the significance around that. The way we actually visualize it ends up by being really important with our clients and also with the tenants and the tenant groups inside of those properties, and how we position that data to help them actually make better decisions. So sometimes we're using this data to help encourage our clients to invest money in certain property programs to update the homes that they're kind of looking after, and how we use that data is really, really kind of important to us. Alerts allow us to decide whether or not we're going to deploy any of our field force out to look at the property. And the alerts may be then looking at understanding what the insulation is, whether there's damp and mold issues potentially in the property that are likely to come. High CO2 levels, for us, it's not so much about the number of people in the property, it's a really good indicator and a proxy for us about how airflow is moving around in the property. If you've got a lot of people in the room, yes, the CO2 levels will kind of go up, but there should be constant airflow in all of our homes. If there's not constant airflow inside our homes, even a small bit, then you start to have the conditions then, if you have high humidity, to have conditions where damp and mold can form. So this is an example of where you're using multiple data sources together to start to give you an indication of what's actually going on inside that property. Visibility for the customer is another key element. So we have developed an app. It's on the App Store. It's the Home Health app that allows us to start to visualize some of this data for the tenant, the individual in the home. For us, they're as important as the person that owns the home and the data that we use. A lot of the challenges that we have in looking after properties is around behavioral changes, and behavioral changes need data to inform people so they can make better decisions. So if you're aware of things like nudge theory, where you can give people a tiny little nugget of piece of information and then look to see if they make that change, we're trying to use that Home Health mobile app to allow a tenant to engage with the sensors that are inside of that property and allow them to take away their own insights from that in how they can maybe then do something different. And we then promote into that app suggestions where we'll see maybe energy usage at certain times, or we'll see around high build-ups of humidity in certain rooms, around suggestions about what they could actually do or how they could actually use their home slightly different to ensure that it's healthy, safe, and sustainable inside of that. So now we get onto the what does it mean for us. And again, this comes back all the way to the starting point. We're not a technology company. We wouldn't profess in any way to be an IoT organization in terms of the technology side of things. We're purely trying to capture that data so that we can use that data more efficiently and more effective. And that for us is the crux of why we're doing this whole piece and why we're deploying the capability. So what we're trying to do is move our business model fundamentally. So historically, we would have been referred to as a reactive business. We're waiting for an individual, a person, to either phone us up, a survey to be conducted which identifies issues and problems out there, for us to then engage into that, to then potentially deploy someone. That's both inefficient for us as a business, where we're then potentially deploying engineering resource on a Sunday night at 10 o'clock in the evening because there's been a fault on an appliance that, quite frankly, we should have known about a long time ago. But also from the experience of the people that we deliver that service from. All you guys out there would would probably not want someone coming into your home at 10 o'clock at night trying to fix a fault that actually we could have rectified weeks before, where we could have booked an appointment, scheduled a visit, and actually done that in a much more of a structured way. So what we're trying to do is move from that reactive organisation into being more predictive and preventative around the assets and the homes that we're actually looking after inside of that. And to do that, that's where we use the hallowed terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence, which takes you into a world of talking to data scientists who, from my experience, seem to try to confuse me on a regular basis and tell me everything is 100 times more complicated than it needs to be. But it's about kind of using that data to actually start to predict things that are going to happen. So in the simple case, if we see constant build-up of humidity in a bathroom at certain times where it doesn't drop below a certain level, we're pretty sure the extractor fan probably inside of that bathroom is not working in the most efficient way, or has maybe been disabled, or is just not working at all. If we don't know about that, and we just let that happen, the fabric of that part of the house will start to erode. The costs involved in then rectifying that are significant, as opposed to we really should have been there solving the extractor fan issue and actually getting on the front foot of the problem, not waiting for it to turn into a terminal issue that then costs thousands of pounds to actually solve. So that concept of turning into that predictive and prescriptive is kind of at the root cause of our business case of what we're trying to get to. That asset performance, and that asset might be an appliance, so it could be in, even today and in the past, that might be a gas boiler predominantly in the UK that's used to heat homes. In the future, is going to be much more complex assets in the home, from technologies that if you guys in Europe have, like heat pumps we talked about, we now have much more solar, we now have much more battery storage going on inside the UK. So the technologies that we're putting into the home are becoming more complex. The ability to actually monitor and manage those, understand how they're impacting on the wider conditions of the home and the property, becomes even more important to us and how we kind of then deliver our service. The further we can get into that, the better we can be. And it's probably one of my messages is to make sure that as any of you guys kind of embark on your journey and you're looking at your use cases, don't necessarily get fixated, as maybe we did in a little way, of the technology side, and there's a sensor and I can get temperature and I can get humidity and we can actually look at air quality. Really focus, once you've got that, how are you going to fundamentally use it to drive your business case? What is the fundamental return on the investment for how you're going to use that data? Because there's some phenomenal use cases that we've then found inside of it. But it's making sure that we don't get stuck in the technology rut of looking at the technology and being wowed and amazed by what you can do, but not necessarily following it all the way through into the different business cases and opportunities that we kind of then do have. So what does this mean for the future for us? So we are fundamentally trying to change not just our property services business, but actually do a transformation across our wider construction and regeneration business. How can we use that data in a way that on a construction site, we can predict where there may be issues around health and safety based on behaviours or based on kind of then data? In the commercial office space that we're building, how do we use that data to ensure that if we're then going to redesign this office and move it from being an environment where there's lots of desks to more of a co-creation space environment, how do we know how people are going to use that space? And once we've done the design, how do we evidence that that's actually happened? Through to the home where we deliver those sensors, about making sure that we are becoming much more around on the front foot of our delivery and our service. How do we know when something's going to go wrong before a human has to ring up and tell us that something's going wrong? How do we actually then reduce our cost of service because we can use the data? How can we use that information to better remote desktop issues and problems that we kind of find out, rather than potentially going straight for the answer of deploying an engineer in a van to that property? It's fundamentally no longer for us about that reactive world, but really trying to use this data that we get from the LoRa sensors through TTI into Azure, we visualize in a million different ways to fundamentally change us to be into much more of that proactive, predictive, and using that data in a way that we hadn't been able to do necessarily before. So I think that's come to the end of kind of my piece. I don't know if there was any kind of questions for it, but I guess my key message is it's the data that's amazing. And how you use that is, I think, the fundamental differentiator for clients, customers that are out there. and how you mix that with other data sources makes it so much more powerful than if it's just a data set specifically on its own about that sensor says this. And that was it for me.
Thank you so much.